You are Lord of creation and Lord of my life, Lord of the land and the sea. You are Lord of creation and Lord of hearts. Lord of all lords you will be. We bow down and we worship you, Lord. We bow down and we worship you, Lord. We bow down and we worship
Should have done that earlier. All right. Sound good? Okay. I'll just wave or something if I go bad. I think the last time I wore one of these, it went out. I didn't know. I was the only person in here who didn't know. I knew after it was over. Everybody told me after it was over. So, all right. Well, good to be up here tonight. I'm usually in there with the kids, so it's nice to be in here and get to talk about the Ten Commandments. So is that a little loud, do you think? Hearing my my clicks and my tongue and stuff. I don't like it. All right, I will speak up though. Talking about the Ten Commandments, when you think about things in the Bible that people are familiar with, this has got to be like in the top 3, top 5. I don't know. Everybody knows the Ten Commandments, right? So it's really culturally important. On anymore, am I? All right. Well, we got to do this. I'm just doing song and dance for now. Yeah, we'll. I'm not really doing anything yet, so I want to know what. I'm kind of wondering what Kevin just said. He got hit. The popularity is interesting. Got me thinking, well, how popular are they? They're so popular that 78% of Americans want the Ten Commandments posted all over the place in public. They're also so popular that only 14% of Americans can say them. So it's interesting that something that people are so excited about, they don't even know what they are. This group's different. You've heard all 10, right? Or 9 of them. So we're going to talk about that 10th one tonight. And as we get started with that, I want us to think a little bit about the story that surrounds this. One thing we often forget when we look at texts like this is they don't occur in a vacuum. They occur as part of something bigger. And that bigger thing is, of course, the story of the Exodus. We don't need to rehash that for this audience, but really quickly, just a few chapters before this, 4 or 5 chapters before this in the book of Exodus, the Israelites have come out of Egypt. They've crossed the Red Sea. God has saved them from the Egyptians. Now they're on the other side of the water, and they're heading toward this mountain to meet their God. They've been in slavery. They have not known their God. They don't know anything about their God. And 3 months after leaving slavery, they end up on this mountain, at the bottom of the mountain, of course. And Moses goes up, and Moses is told in chapter 19 of Exodus, when they get to this mountain, Moses is told, this is what you're to say to all these people, to all these Israelites that came out of Egypt with you. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession, although the whole earth is mine. You will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you speak to the Israelites. So this is the first thing that Moses hears from God. You're going to tell these people who they're going to be. They're going to be mine. And they're going to be very special. They're going to be this group of people. They're going to be like priests to all the nations. They're going to be the people that everyone looks at to know who I am, to know what holiness is. You live in this world, you want to know what holiness is, you look at my people. That's how you're going to figure it out. So that's the introduction to Moses. And then, in the next chapter, we get to the 10 Commandments. they're really interesting, as you all know. I mean, they are full of, I'm like, how am I going to talk for 20 minutes about coveting? Well, I got 5 hours of material. So, that's not going to be a problem. When you start looking at each of these 10 commandments, you find out how layered they are and how significant they are for Israel. And one of the things that I just find very interesting about them is when chapter 20 begins, it begins with this phrase, and God spoke all these words. This is the only place in Exodus where we have God speaking to all the people. The rest of the law is going to be Moses speaking to the people. But right now, 3 months after coming out of Egypt, Israel is meeting their God, and they're really meeting their God. They've come to the mountain. There's lightning, there's fire, there's storm, and God comes down, and they hear a voice, and the voice is these 10 commandments. If you want to read them later, we won't talk about it much tonight, but as soon as God is done, the people say, please don't ever let that happen again. That's enough. And from there on out, Moses becomes the interpreter for God. But these are special because these are the ones that God spoke to the people. And it says, and God spoke all these words. They're not called the 10 Commandments here. They're called all these words. In other places in the Bible, they're called the 10 words or the 10 matters. They're not called the 10 Commandments. We call them that. It's fine. It's a fine designation. But I think 10 words or 10 matters might come in, be a little important thing for us to think about maybe in a few minutes when we're talking through something. We'll get there in a minute, though. All right, so as we start, I know I'm supposed to be doing the 10th one, but I want to point out one more thing. Look at how the 10 Commandments start. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. So when we're thinking about these 10 things, these 10 sayings of God to God's people here, the first thing we want to notice is that they're in the context not of, here's something to do. They're in the context of, here is what I have done for you. The 10 Commandments only make sense to Israel because Israel has just come out of slavery, and God says, I'm the one that did it. You saw me beat up on Egypt's God. You saw Pharaoh go down. I'm the one who did it. And so, do you want to know me? Well, knowing me is knowing this, the 10 Commandments. Tonight, our commandment is do not covet. So we want to start by reading that commandment, which is in chapter 20, verse 17. Actually, I'm going to read both versions. It's in chapter 20, 17, and then, of course, the second recounting of the 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy chapter 5. They're pretty similar, but I do want to read both of them. So, 2017, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. And Deuteronomy 5:21. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not set your desire on your neighbor's house or land, his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Not a lot of difference there, but a little different order. And there's two verbs in Deuteronomy, two different verbs for covet. We only have one in Exodus. We might talk about that later. We'll see. So when I began thinking about this, first Ricky showed me the list, and there were only 2 left. And I said, I don't want that one, so I'll take covet. And I don't even really know what coveting is, but that's the one I'll take. So, I mean, I know what coveting is, but I had some questions because as I started thinking about it, I was like, coveting, I only know what coveting is because I went to church growing up. I don't think I've ever really heard the word it's funny, Paul says the same thing, actually, not the church part, but I think Paul says about the same thing. But I only know about coveting kind of in this context. So it made me think, well, what's this really about? And when I want to know what something's about, I pull out my concordance and I look where the word is found and how it's used in other places, and I try to piece some things together. So I did that in this case. One of the interesting things I found right off is that the word's a very simple word. It means desire. It's used all over the Bible, though not a whole lot of times. 21 times I found it in the Old Testament. And lots of other places, very clearly means desire. There's no special word for covet in the Hebrew Bible, we'll show you why in a minute. It means desire. So I was thinking about that, and I was like, okay, well, desire in English can be positive or negative. This is clearly negative. Do not do this, but I wonder if it's like that in the Bible. So I'm looking at some of these examples, and I want to read a couple of them. We'll start in Deuteronomy 7. We're going to need to flip around a little bit here. Deuteronomy 7:25 says, the images of their gods you are to burn. When you go into the land, burn their gods in fire. Do not desire, do not covet the silver and gold on them. Do not take it for yourselves, or you will be ensnared by it, for it is detestable to the Lord your God. So burn it all up. Do not desire it. Do not want it. Another example, Joshua 7, verse 21. When I saw the plunder, a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them, I desired them, and I took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent with the silver underneath. You probably know this story. This is Achan. Achan, who is not supposed to take these things, just like Deuteronomy said, he does anyway because he desired them. Interesting, followed up with another verb. I desired and I took. I did something about it. I took them. But those are not the only verses that use this word. Look in the Psalms. At Psalm 19. Let's read Psalm 19, verse 10. Well, we'll go back to verse 9. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The decrees of the Lord are firm. All of them are righteous. They are more precious, the laws of God. They are more precious than gold, than much pure gold. They are sweeter than honey, the honey from the honeycomb. This is the same word. Mine says precious. I don't know what yours says. They are more desired. That makes this whole thing easier, right? If we use the same word over and over. They are more desired than gold. Good or bad? Well, it's talking about the law of God, the commandments of God being desirable. So, okay, good. There's a bunch like this, but we'll do one more. Let's do Psalm 68. So 19 was desirable to people, and this one, we'll see, is desirable in a different way. Psalm 68, verse 16. Let's see here. 16. Why gaze in envy, you rugged mountain, at the mountain where God desires to reign, where the Lord God himself will dwell forever. So the place where God will reign is the place that God desires to reign. Same word again. So the same word in all of these texts. Why do I point this out? I want you to see that if we had this commandment the way I learned it, it wouldn't make sense. Because when I learned it, I learned do not covet. And that doesn't make any sense when you read the Bible, when you read the other texts. Because it would probably, a better way to say that right now would be, do not desire. The commandment is not do not desire. The commandment is do not desire your neighbor's house. Do not desire your neighbor's wife or servants or ox or donkey. So the whole is important, because without the whole verse, we'd probably scratch our heads a little bit. Do not desire. Well, that sounds a little confusing. I mean, desire is legitimate. It's just one of the things that we do. But what this commandment is getting us to do is to say, wait a minute, when is desire legitimate, and when is desire illegitimate? And when is it destructive? And what can it do if focused in the wrong way? So that's a starting point. Again, we're going to loop around to all of these things in a minute. But there's one more thing we need to point out. I don't know if you've ever noticed this or not. When you read commandments 1 through 9, they're all illicit actions. Don't make an idol. Don't worship another god. Don't kill anybody. Don't steal anything. This one is so different than all the other 9. Don't desire. It's a kind of a heart issue, right? It's not an action. Where the first 9 are all actions. They're all things that do. The first 9 are things that we're real familiar with even from our own court systems. If you kill somebody or are accused of killing somebody, you go to court and they talk about it and they figure out what to do. If you think about something, you don't usually have to go answer for thinking about something. So number 10 is doing something a little bit different than the other 9 are doing. Now, it's not strange in any way. If we were in Deuteronomy, the 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy 5, and we flipped the page, the next commandment in Deuteronomy 6 would say, love God. Okay, well, that's not very actionable either, in the same way as, I didn't steal anything today. Did I love God today? Well, there's a lot of layers to that. There's a lot of different ways to look at it, and it could bring up a lot of discussion, which is what this commandment against desiring or coveting does as well. So we're going to think through that, and the way I want to go about that is to look at some of these other texts in the Bible where coveting happens, where it occurs, where it's talked about, and see how it's used and what those stories are about, and just kind of package all that together and see what we can pull from it. Because on one hand, it's pretty clear what the 10th commandment is about. This guy's got some stuff, and you want it, and you shouldn't be doing that. But it doesn't flesh it all out for us. We'd have to sit down and talk about, well, what if this, or what if that? And what does it mean? What if I really need a donkey? Can I desire one? Well, probably, but just not his, right? So, and what does it mean to desire that one in a way that is going to get you or us into trouble? Some of these verses, I think, will help us with that. Our first one we're going to look at is in the book of Micah. This one turned out to be a great example because it sounds so much like the 10th commandment. So in the book of Micah, chapter 2, we have, woe to those who plan iniquity, to those who plot evil on their beds. At morning's light they carry it out, because it is in their power to do it. They covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them. They defraud people of their homes. They rob them of their inheritance. You'd see some 10th commandment in there, right? I mean, even beyond the word covet, you see language of fields and houses, and some of these things that are listed in that commandment of coveting. And what's so interesting about this one is that, is this legal, illegal? It's wrong. Some things can be wrong without being illegal, right? When we look at what the person is doing, where is the person when this is happening? When they're scheming, when they're coveting, when they're desiring something of someone else's? They're in their bed. I mean, this is their life. This is what they do when they lay down at night and wake up in the morning. How am I going to get what I want? First thing that popped into my head is credit cards on this one. You get them in college, $5,000 free to spend, much as you want, only at a 20% interest rate. How many people have jumped into this very legal thing and never in their life gotten back out? That's what this is talking about. Coveting is desiring something of someone else's in a way that you scheme and you take time and you figure out how to get them. We could probably think of a lot of things that fit into that category. Certain kinds of mortgages that are basically traps for people who don't have enough money, that are just going to sink them and they're never going to get out. One of the very interesting words in this verse is the word power. These people are in their bed scheming. Why? Because they have the power to do it. This is not somebody stealing bread so they can feed their family at night. This is some rich guy thinking about how to get more. And that's who Micah's talking to. Really interesting that when we think about coveting in the Bible, so many times it's focused on the rich. We can think about examples like David scheming to steal Bathsheba from her husband. And as he schemes and covets, he eventually gets her. Or Ahab, who covets the vineyard of Naboth, and Jezebel comes in to steal it. Interestingly, both of these kings in the process also commit murder, which I think is important for what we're talking about. When we said earlier that coveting is a heart issue, there's a reason why a heart issue gets brought up at the very end. Because this heart issue that you focus on and you focus on and you dwell on until you take something of someone else's, I just said the word take, that's one of the commandments too, stealing. It gets very easy to start breaking all kinds of other commandments when you go in the wrong direction on the 10th one. There are other texts that we don't really have time to read, but Deuteronomy 25 talks about the guys with the scales, and they weigh things for people, and they use one scale for one to take money, and they use another scale to pay out, and the scales don't work, and so they're cheating people on both sides. There's Isaiah that talks about the guy who buys field after field and buys house after house until there's no one left in town except him because he owns everything. When you hear these kinds of things, you think back to this 10th commandment, and you're like, oh yeah, slaves, animals, someone else's stuff. It's this idea of gathering and grabbing as much as possible. Can poor people covet? Of course, poor people can covet. There's no doubt about that. But there's a real interest in the Bible on the rich and the powerful, like in Micah, and what it means. A lot of times I've thought of, and I might be just wrong about this, I've thought of covet as just wanting something someone else has. I don't really think that's what this is talking about. We all want stuff all the time. I think this is talking more about this planning and scheming to take. Now, it is the heart part. It's not the actual taking part, but it's the lead up to get you to that point. Another verse. This is great. Of course, I'm going to say that on all of them. They're all great. Genesis 3:6. There's only one place that coveting is mentioned before the Ten Commandments, and it's in Genesis chapter 3. And I thought that was pretty wild. It's even crazier because, like, in Genesis chapter 3, 2 different words for coveting are used, and they're the same 2 words that are used in Deuteronomy 5 and the Ten Commandments. And those are the only 2 places in the Bible where those 2 words are used together. So let's look at that verse. Clearly one we're supposed to, with the words overlapping like that, clearly one we're supposed to be looking at. Here we have a garden scene where the snake has been talking to the woman, and they've had this conversation about this fruit. If you remember this, there's 2 trees in the Garden of Eden, and there's 2 special trees. There's lots of trees. There's 2 special ones. One is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Not supposed to eat that one. The other one is the tree of life. Doesn't say whether they can eat that one or not. Until the end of the chapter, after they've eaten the first one, they can't have the second one. You cannot have both. That's for sure. But you're not supposed to eat of the tree of good and evil, which is the one that the woman and the serpent are talking about. Verse 6 of chapter 3, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was desirable for food and pleasing to the eye, desirable for gaining wisdom, she took and she ate it, and she gave some to her husband who was with her. So the 2 people are standing there chatting with the snake, looking at the fruit. The eyes see it, the body wants it. The desire, of course, is natural. It brings wisdom. Hey, that's a good thing, right? Well, it is almost everywhere else in the Bible. But it was off limits. Why was it off limits? Because God said it was off limits. However, if you go back 1 chapter, we have our word again in verse 9 of chapter 2. The Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. So this isn't the only desirable tree in the garden. In fact, they're all desirable, but one of them's off limits. So again, good and bad on desirable. Chapter 2, good. You can eat the desirable ones. Chapter 3, no. Good and bad, but what happens? The woman desires and takes. I don't know if you've noticed, but we've had the combination of desire and take a lot tonight. Achan, I desired and I took. Deuteronomy 7, don't desire and take the gold that you see. Micah 2:2, same thing. Desire, crave, take. So Genesis 3 is a lot like the 10th commandment. There's something here that is desirable, but it's off limits. In the 10th commandment, what is off limits? Other people's stuff that they already own, off limits. Don't dwell on it all the time because you can't have it. That's not right. Here, this tree is off limits. It doesn't exactly say why. Kind of does, but it's really confusing. So we won't go into that tonight. But it's off limits. The people have been told not to eat of it. We could say the same thing with a lot of things. Can you desire a house? Sure. I want a new house. Can I desire someone else's house? No, that's different. Okay? So that little bit of explanation in the 10th commandment helps us out a lot. And what happens is we see in the Bible the first act of disobedience is breaking the 10th commandment. It didn't exist, but it's coveting. The first act of disobedience is coveting. And desire out of control can change the world. You might think, one here, it's like everything else. One little thing, one here, there. But what Genesis 3 is telling us, it can make a big difference. And if you've ever read the rest of Genesis 3, you know how that plays out. Let's look at one more of these. We'll do a New Testament one. The book of James. James chapter 4. Yeah. James chapter 4, the beginning of the chapter. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. That's a powerful couple of verses right there. You covet, so you murder. That seems like a big jump. But in these texts that we read about Ahab and David, it wasn't a big jump. It happened pretty quick. You covet, so you fight. And why does this all happen? Because you don't ask God. Again, a very interesting text that it sounds like the root of so much human conflict is actually found in desire. It doesn't just happen. And maybe that's why we have the 10th commandment, because I'm not going to murder anybody. I'm not even going to steal anything. I'm not going to do this one. I'm not going to do that. I'm not planning on making an image of God anytime soon. But if I sit down and desire for weeks and months on end, I might change my mind about some of those things. Might get a little irritated with one of you. And if I dwell on it for too many years, it might go bad, right? So, maybe that's an extreme, let's hope that's an extreme example. But let's also say that there's something about this last commandment being about the heart that should get us thinking about all the other commandments around it. So, what is coveting? It's a destructive force. It's something that can destroy neighborhoods, communities. Why do I say that? Because the very real example that the Ten Commandments gives, houses, families, animals, these are communal, the things that are happening right around you. Coveting things like that can destroy entire communities, even though this is just an emotion. It's not an action. But I think the Ten Commandments are telling us that there's no such thing as just an emotion, that this can really build into and become something. So look around you. What do you see? If you focus your attention on the people, the stuff, whatever is around you, what can happen if you focus on what others are and what others have all the time is that you could end up breaking other commandments, especially 6 through 9, maybe even 1 through 5, right? Maybe all of them. Achan desires and takes. David, Ahab desire. They take, they steal, they kill, and they end up breaking a bunch of commandments just out of this list of 10 in the process. There's some other interesting language tied to this in the Bible, all the time in the prophets. Do not desire gold and silver. This one's probably a tough one for us, but there's a special reason why the Old Testament is concerned with do not desire gold and silver, because what do you do with gold and silver? It's exactly what you do. You don't take it to the bank and cash it. You build idols with it. And so when you get too much gold and silver, you break the first commandment, the second commandment, maybe the third commandment, and other things can start happening there too. So even coveting does have to do with those first few commandments as well. So what we're seeing tonight is that when we read the 10 Commandments, and when we read especially the 10th commandment, and we talk about this emotional root, it is something that can lead to these other activities, these other actions, these other crimes like adultery, theft, lying, murder, those things you've been talking about for the last several weeks. So, do I have 3 minutes or 10 minutes?
You have as much as
says the preacher. I'll hit the middle. I want to try to bring all this together in a kind of a conclusion. All these texts we've looked at. So, one way to bring them together, I think, is to talk about it from a couple of different angles. One being, what do we not do with this text? This may seem too simple, but I want to say it anyway, because if someone who does not have something tells someone who does have something they want it, don't say don't covet. Okay, that's not good. It's not good for the people who have to tell the people who don't have, just be at peace with not having. That's not what coveting's about. Coveting is about focusing on stuff that belongs to others and leaning toward scheming and taking. It's a certain type of heart issue. Wanting something, we all do. We're all going to do. Now that can become coveting. I mean, there's steps to all this, we know. But I think we need to really pay attention to Micah 2 and that language of power. And in our own conversations, think about what Micah is saying about power in relationship to coveting. Some things are easy. Should we desire God and wisdom? Yeah, of course, all the time. Should we desire something that belongs to someone else? No, never. Should we desire money or shelter? Well, okay, that's more conversation. There's gray areas here too in terms of these things. So some are on this end, very obvious, this end, very obvious, and this commandment gets us to think about, what does some of this tougher stuff do? How do we deal with that? Well, we usually deal with that in conversation with people who know God, is what we do.
Don't you think that's what Jesus was doing in Matthew 5 when he brings the old commandments into the new?
Yeah, right.
Where he says, don't kill, instead of kill, don't hate.
Right. I mean, backs it up. He makes it, makes it tough. He makes it a lot harder. Yes, he makes it thoughts, makes it a lot harder. He even uses coveting in there. So, that's a great example of there's like this huge mistake we make sometimes. Oh, Jesus came to be our buddy and make everything easy. Not if you read Matthew 5. It gets really, really tough. And so, that's an excellent example of that. Another thing I wanted to point out is we mentioned how coveting can just destroy communities. Isaiah talks about this. You take a field, you take another field, you're just running people off and amassing all of this. One thing that I found so interesting is that Deuteronomy, right after the 10 Commandments, in the very next chapter, does this really neat thing. In Deuteronomy 6, begins with, just having heard the 10 Commandments. Now I'm going to give you even more commandments, starting with love God. But when we get down to about verse 6, these commandments are to be on your hearts. We've used the word heart a lot tonight. All of these commandments in Deuteronomy, put them on your heart. And what do you do with them? Impress them upon your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk on the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them to your foreheads and write them on your doors. What do you do with the commandments? You just talk about them and think about them and teach them all the time, all the time. What is this? This is coveting in the good way. Over and over and over all the time, whenever you can. Why? Because it makes your community better. It makes you know God, which is what the Ten Commandments are about. Hey, I'm your God. I'm your holy God. You just met me. It's a little scary, but this is who I am. You be like me. That's what the Ten Commandments is. And in Deuteronomy 6, it says, now go desire all the time. Tell your children about this. If you sit around and think about what somebody else has got all the time, where do you end up? With a hole inside your gut in a really dark place. Or you could do something very opposite and talk about God all the time, and you're going to feel different. It's about heart. It's about focus. And you do have some amount of control over it. So, I got 2 more texts, and then we can call it. Another question I said, what's the opposite of coveting? And go figure, there's a great Bible verse that tells us what the opposite of coveting is. It's Proverbs 21:26. And it says, all day long the wicked covet. All day long the wicked desire. But the righteous give and do not hold back. What does Proverbs say the opposite of coveting is? Giving. Grabbing up all your possessions, grabbing up all your stuff, getting stuff from everybody else could be seen as a lack of trust in God, because what is God if not a giver? As one who is generous, and one who trusts in God could do that opposite. So, I said 2 verses. I'll read the other one. Colossians, and then I'll close. There's always more, but we can stop. Colossians chapter 3. Beginning at the first verse. Since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. All right, that's what we've been talking about all night. You can set your mind on this, or you can set your mind on that. You got a choice. Set your mind on one of these things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and coveting, which is idolatry. Coveting is idolatry. That is the worst thing you can do in the Bible, is worship another God. And here, coveting is tied to idolatry. The 10th commandment to the first commandment. Right there we have it. So, what is Colossians saying? Violating that 10th commandment comes from violating the first commandment, from idolatry. And there's a desire we can cultivate for good things. There's a desire we should stay away from and avoid. So, humans, what we are. We're good, we're evil. That's what we are. Our state of mind, our desires, our heart leads us to good and evil. That's how it works. The 10th commandment encourages us to not focus on that one side so that we have time to cultivate that other side, to think about those good things of God. Don't think about the things in our heart that will cause us to break multiple commandments. Think about the things that will make us like God so that we can manifest that goodness, that holiness to God's world, to all that's around us. So this, like so many things, comes down to a choice. a state of mind, a difficult one. I like to do this thing up here because I don't have to like act like it's as hard as it really is. I mean, God, there's no telling how many things I've coveted today, right? But working through the text is that kind of thing that we're talking about. Hey, look at this text, look at this one, look at this one, and that focuses us on a different path. I did actually think a few times today about, I probably shouldn't be thinking about that, because I was going to do this tonight. So it helps. It really works. So having said that, with that choice in front of us, that's a good way, a good place to offer our invitation. We can focus and grow and become and be transformed, like Paul talks about, or we can devolve from something that is not even visibly human in the way that God intended. It's not a one step on either one. It's growth, it's time, it's work, it's thought, it's purpose. Having said that, if you have any needs tonight, we definitely want to give you that time to come, since you are here with your family who cares for you. If you need any prayers or anything else, we ask that you come while we stand and sing this song.